Oh, Sir Doggo. Of course he wants to be a menace right now. Welcome in, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to Bryant, Frankie, and Phantom. Welcome in. This is a bit different stream than I mean, it's one that I tend to do, but it's not a very, I like doing it. Welcome in, Gray, as well. Just a reading stream, just going through some Edgar Allan Poe. I am 531 pages into a 1,020-page book, and I'm gonna finish it all. Not sure when, but it will happen. Immediately gets cozy. Oh, welcome in, everyone. I hope you've been having a wonderful day. Mine, I'm currently sitting in a house full of smoke. I messed up cooking just a little. Okay, the chicken didn't cook right, so I had to keep throwing it back in the pan, and that did not work. So my house is full of smoke. I am fine, but if I start to cough a little bit, that's why. You're taking the night off and lurk. Well, thank you very much for the lurk. I always appreciate them. Okay, so the first story is not, I don't think, anything special. The second story, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep a straight face. I don't think most people are going to be able to keep a straight face. It's not good. I already laughed about it with Frankie. It's something. It surely will be. So, no point in delaying any further. No point in delaying any further. It is time to read. You weren't adult about it, and neither was I. It's fine. There will be those moments. It happens. Okay, but the first one that we are going to be talking about, or that we're going to be reading, is The Black Cat. I like that a lot. All right. And it doesn't begin with a preface. We are allowed to be immature. You are allowed to be very immature in that story. So, The Black Cat, no preface. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely I do not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than baroques. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. Have I read this before? Surely not. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratitude thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute, which goes directly to the heart of him who has frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not so uncongenial, with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto was the cat's name, and was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me whenever I went around the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took off my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, and grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. This is horrible. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble and unequivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I once again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all the memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, and it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of the creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which gave direction to the character of man. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? The spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse in my heart. Hung it because I knew it had loved me, and because I had felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would jeopardize my mortal soul, as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity. But I am detailing a chain of facts, and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas-relief, upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope around the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. I keep messing up my, just gonna pull that up so that it can see me. There we go. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of the other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reasoning, if not altogether my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and, during this period, there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts, which I had now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species, and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of the immense hogshead of gin or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of the hogshead for some minutes, and now what caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it, and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto and resembling him closely, in every aspect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame, and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with an unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence. What added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed, in a high degree, that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its impartiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it would have been difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair, or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and nearly throw me down, or, fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to my own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own, that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would have been possible to conceive. Sorry about that. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character and mark of white hair, of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this above all I loathed and dreaded, and would have ridded myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows, O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and of death. And now I was indeed wretched, beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started, hourly, from dreams of unutterable fear, to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Welcome to everyone coming in. Thank you very much. Thank you. Beneath the pressures of torment such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to a hatred of things, and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me into a madness. Uplifting an axe and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal if it had descended if I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife, goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal. I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith and with entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house either by day or by night without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. Again, I deliberated about casting it into the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered through with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or a fireplace, that had been filled up and made to resemble the red of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole up as before, so that no one could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed by the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep, the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least since its introduction into the house, I slept soundly and tranquilly. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a freeman. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make a rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked from the cell from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say but one word by way of triumph, and to render doubly their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house." In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. "I may say, an excellently well-constructed house. Those walls, are you going, gentlemen? Those walls are solidly put together." And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane in which I held in my hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of my wife of my bosom. May the gods shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. By a cry at first muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one loud, long, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman. A howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have only arisen out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the suspectors. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled up the monster within the tomb. That was an awful story. I hate that. I hate that a lot. I don't handle animal abuse well. With 3 of my own, I could never imagine hurting them. Ever. I feel bad if I, step on a paw. Okay, I'm gonna get more water. I've been going through it quite quickly with the smoke in the house. And then we'll get on to the story that I'm not gonna not be able to laugh at. I'll be right back. Oh, Sir Doggo. You have to go outside, bud. No, come here. It appears I'll be taking a longer break than expected. Sir Doggo might need to go outside, so I'm going to put the be right back screen on and, well, hopefully be right back. Oh, I guess I had my mic on the whole time. Hopefully you guys didn't hear anything. Shit. Hi. I am okay today. Welcome in, Darkus. It was a rough story to get through, the first one. I very much dislike I don't know. It was all about animal abuse. I don't handle that well. I gave my own black cat quite the hug. But Sir Doggo is walked. All is well. And, yeah. We'll go into the next one that is going to be... Oh boy, is it going to be a story. I don't think you are all ready for this one. The title of this one being, a different context than we're used to this word being used now, and hopefully this actually doesn't get me punked by YouTube. It is simply a story. The title is Diddling Considered as One of the Exact Sciences. The preface is, hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. Welcome in, Sky. What you just got here. It is used in a different context here. Apparently it is used in the context of crime in ways to gain money. So yeah, we're just gonna go. Welcome into a reading stream. Since the world began, there have been two Jeremys. The one wrote a Jeremiad about usurpy and was called Jeremy Bentham. He was much admired by Mr. John Neal and was a great man in a small way. The other gave name to the most important of the exact sciences and was a great man in a great way. I may say, indeed, in the very greatest of ways. Diddling, or the abstract idea conveyed by the verb to diddle, is sufficiently well understood. Yet the fact, the deed, the thing diddling is somewhat difficult to define. We may get, however, at a tolerably distinct conception of the matter in hand by defining not the thing diddling in itself, but man as an animal that diddles. Had Plato but hit upon this, he would have been spared the affront of the picked chicken. Very pertinently, it was demanded of Plato why a picked chicken, which was clearly a biped without feathers, was not, according to his own definition, a man. But I am not to be bothered by any similar query. Man is an animal that diddles, and there is no animal that diddles but man. It will take an entire hen coop of picked chickens to get over that. What constitutes the essence, the nair, the principle of diddling is, in fact, peculiar to the class of creatures that wears coats and pantaloons. A crow thieves, a fox cheats, a weasel outwits, a man diddles. To diddle is his destiny. Man was made to mourn, says the poet, but not so. He was made to diddle. That is his aim, his object, his end. And for this reason, when a man's diddled, we say he's done. Diddling, rightly considered, is a compound of which the ingredients are minuteness, interest, perseverance, ingenuity, audacity, nonchalance, originality, impertinence, and grin. Minuteness. Your diddler is minute. His operations are upon a small scale. His business is retail for cash or approved paper at sight. Should he ever be tempted into magnificent speculation, he then at once loses his distinctive features and becomes what we term financier. This latter word conveys the diddling idea in every respect except that of magnitude. A diddler may thus be regarded as a banker in petto, a financial operation as a diddle at Brobdingnag. The one is to the other as Homer to Flaccus, as a mastodon to a mouse, as the tail of a comet to that of a pig. Just like your Katamari. Interest. Your diddler is guided by self-interest. He scorns to diddle for the mere sake of the diddle. He has an object in view, his pocket, and yours. He regards always the main chance. He looks to number one. You are number two, and must look to yourself. Perseverance. Your diddler perseveres. He's not readily discouraged. Should even the banks break, he cares nothing about it. He steadily pursues his end, and et canis curio nunquam abstaribatur uncto. So he never lets go of his game. Ingenuity. Your diddler is ingenious. He has constructiveness large. He understands plot. He invents and circumvents. Were he not Alexander, he would be Diogenes. Were he not a diddler, he would be a maker of patent rat traps or an angler for trout. Audacity. Your diddler is audacious. He's a bold man. He carries the war into Africa. He conquers all by assault. He would not fear the daggers of Freiherren. With a little more prudence, Dick Turpin would have made a good diddler. With a trifle less blarney, Daniel O'Connell with a pound or two more brains. Charles XII. Nonchalance. Your diddler is nonchalant. He is not at all nervous. He never had any nerves. He never seduced into a flurry. He is never put out unless put out of doors. He is cool, cool as a cucumber. He is calm, calm as a smile from Lady Barry. He is easy, easy as an old glove or the damsels of ancient Bear. Oh my god, the smoke is getting my eyes. Originality. Your diddler is original. Conscientiously so. His thoughts are his own. He would scorn to employ those of another. A stale trick is his aversion. He would return a purse, I am sure, upon discovering that he had obtained it by an unoriginal diddle. Impertinence. Your diddler is impertinent. He swaggers. He sets his arms akimbo. He thrusts his hands in your trousers pockets. He sneers in your face. He treads on your corns. He eats your dinner. He drinks your wine. He borrows your money. He pulls your nose. He kicks your poodle, and he kisses your wife. Grin. Your true diddler winds up all with a grin. But this nobody sees but himself. He grins when his daily work is done, when his allotted labors are accomplished, at night in his own closet, and all together for his own private entertainment. He goes home, he locks his door, he divests himself of his clothes, he puts out his candle, he gets into bed, he places his head upon the pillows. All this done, and your diddler grins. There is no hypothesis, it is a matter of course. I reason a priori, and a diddle would be no diddle without a grin. The origin of the diddle is referable to the infancy of the human race. Perhaps the first diddler was Adam. At all events, we can trace the science back to a very remote period of antiquity. The moderns, however, have brought it to a perfection never dreamed of by our thick-headed progenitors. Without pausing to speak of the old saws, therefore, I shall content myself with a compendious account of some of the more modern instances. Yes, your poodle. I'm sorry, Frankie. Wow. Water. I need water. A very good diddle is this. A housekeeper in want of a sofa, for instance, is seen to go in and out of several cabinet warehouses. At length she arrives at one offering an excellent variety. She is accosted and invited to enter by a polite and voluble individual at the door. She finds a sofa well adapted to her views, and upon inquiring the price is surprised and delighted to hear a sum named at least 20% lower than her expectations. She hastens to make the purchase, gets a bill and receipt, leaves her address with a request that the article be sent home as speedily as possible, and retires amid a profusion of bows from the shopkeeper. The night arrives, and no sofa. The next day passes, and still none. A servant is said to make the inquiry about the delay. The whole transaction is denied. No sofa has been sold, no money received, except by the diddler who played shopkeeper for the nonce. Our cabinet warehouses are left entirely unattended and thus afforded every facility for a trick of this kind. Visitors enter, look at furniture, and depart unheeded and unseen. Should anyone wish to purchase or to inquire the price of an article, a bell is at hand, and this is considered amply sufficient. Again, quite a respectable diddle is this. A well-dressed individual enters a shop, makes a purchase to the value of $1, finds much to his vexation that he has left his pocketbook in another coat pocket, and so says to the shopkeeper, "My dear sir, never mind. Just oblige me, will you, by sending the bundle home? But stay. I really believe that I have nothing less than a $500 bill even there. Or $5 bill even there. However, you can send $4 and change with the bundle, you know." "Very good, sir," replies the shopkeeper, who entertains at once a lofty opinion of the high-mindedness of his customer. "I know fellows," he says to himself, "who would have just put the goods under their arms and walked off with a promise to call and pay the dollar as soon as they came by in the afternoon." A boy is sent with the parcel and change. On the route, quite accidentally, he is met by the purchaser, who exclaims, "Ah, this is my bundle, I see. I thought you'd been home with it long ago. Well, go on. My wife, Mrs. Trotter, will give you the $5. I left instructions with her to that effect. The change you might as well give to me. I shall want for some silver for the post office. Very good. 1, 2, is this a good quarter? 3, 4, quite right. Say to Mrs. Trotter that you met me, and be sure now, do not loiter on the way." The boy doesn't loiter at all, but he is a very long time in getting back from his errand, for no lady of the precise name of Mrs. Trotter is to be discovered. He consoles himself, however, that he's not been such a fool as to leave the goods without the money, and, re-entering his shop with a self-satisfied air, feels sensibly hurt and indignant when his master asks him what has become of the change. A very simple diddle indeed is this. The captain of a ship which is about to set sail is presented by an official-looking person with an unusual moderate bill of city charges. Glad to get off so easily and confused by 100 duties pressing upon him all at once, he discharges the claim forthwith. In about 15 minutes, another and less reasonable bill is handed him by one who soon makes it evident that the first collector was a diddler, and the original collection is a diddle. And here, too, is a somewhat similar thing. A steamboat is casting loose from the wharf. A traveler, portmanteau in hand, is discovered running towards the wharf at full speed. Suddenly, he makes a dead halt, stoops, and picks something up from the ground in a very agitated manner. It is a pocketbook, and "Has any gentleman lost a pocketbook?" he cries. No one can say that he has exactly lost a pocketbook, but a great excitement ensues when the treasure trove is found to be of value. The boat, however, must not be detained. "Time and tide wait for no man," says the captain. "For God's sake, stay only a few minutes," says the finder of the book. "The true claimant will presently appear." "Can't wait," replies the man in authority. "Cast off there, d'ye hear?" "What am I to do?" asks the finder in great tribulation. "I'm about to leave the country for some years, and cannot conscientiously retain this large amount in my possession. I beg your pardon, sir." Here he addresses a gentleman on shore. "But you have the air of an honest man. Will you confer upon me the favor of taking charge of this pocketbook? I know I can trust you, and of advertising it. The notes, you see, amount to a very considerable sum. The owner will, no doubt, insist upon rewarding you for your trouble." "Me? No, you. It was you who found the book." "Well, if you must have it so, I will take a small reward just to satisfy my scruples. Let me see. Why, these notes are all hundreds. Bless my soul, 100 is much too much to take. 50 would be quite enough, I'm sure." "Cast off there," says the captain. "But I have no change for 100, and upon the whole you had better—" "Cast off there," says the captain. "Never mind," cries the gentleman on shore, who has been examining his own pocketbook for the last minute or so. "Never mind, I can fix it. Here's a 50 on the Bank of North America. Throw the book." And the overconscientious finder takes the 50 with marked reluctance, and throws the gentleman the book as desired, while the steamboat fumes and fizzes on her way. In an hour and a half hour after her departure, the large amount is seen to be a counterfeit presentment, and the whole thing a capital diddle. Welcome and read. A bold diddle is this. A camp meeting or something similar is to be held at a certain spot which is accessible only by means of a free bridge. A diddler stations himself upon this bridge, respectfully informs of all passers-by of the new county law, which establishes a toll of 1 cent for foot passengers, 2 for horses and donkeys, and so forth and so forth. Some grumble, but all submit, and the diddler goes home a wealthy man by some $50 or $60 well earned. This taking a toll from a great crowd of people is an excessively troublesome thing. A neat diddle is this. A friend holds one of the diddler's promises to pay, filled up and signed in due form upon the ordinary blanks printed in red ink. The diddler purchases 1 or 2 dozen of these blanks and every day dips one of them into his soup, makes his dog jump for it, and finally gives it to him as a bonne bouche. The note arriving at maturity, the diddler, with the diddler's dog, calls upon the friend and the promise to pay is made the topic of discussion. The friend produces it from his escritoire and is in the act of reaching it to the diddler when up jumps the diddler's dog and devours it forthwith. The diddler is not only surprised but vexed and incensed at the absurd behavior of his dog and expresses his entire readiness to cancel the obligation at any moment when the evidence of the obligation shall be forthcoming. A very minute diddle is this. A lady is insulted in the street by a diddler's accomplice. The diddler himself flies to her attendance and gives his friend an uncomfortable thrashing, insists upon attending the lady to her own door. He bows with his hand upon his heart and most respectfully bids her adieu. She entreats him, as her deliverer, to walk in and be introduced to her big brother and papa. With a sigh, he declines to do so. "Is there no way, then, sir," she murmurs, "in which I may be permitted to testify my gratitude?" "Why, yes, ma'am, there is. Will you be so kind to lend me a couple of shillings?" I wrote this all in my science book. Shh. Suspend your disbelief. In the first excitement of the moment, the lady decides upon fainting outright. Upon second thought, however, she opens her purse strings and delivers the specie. Now this, I say, is a diddle minute, for 1 entire moiety of the sum borrowed has to be paid to the gentleman who had the trouble of performing the insult, and who then had to stand still and be thrashed for performing it. Rather a small but still a scientific diddle is this. The diddler approaches the bar of a tavern and demands a couple of twists of tobacco. These are handed to him when, having slightly examined them, he says, "I don't much like this tobacco. Here, take it back and give me a glass of brandy and a water in its place." The brandy and water is furnished and imbibed, and the diddler makes his way to the door, but the voice of the tavern keeper arrests him. "I believe, sir, you have forgotten to pay for your brandy and water." "Pay for my brandy and water? Didn't I give you the tobacco for the brandy and water? What more would you have?" "But, sir, if you please, I don't remember that you paid me for the tobacco." "What do you mean by that, you scoundrel? Didn't I give you back your tobacco? Is that your tobacco lying there? Do you expect me to pay for what I did not take?" "But, sir," says the publican, now rather at a loss what to say. "But, sir—" "No, but me, no buts, sir," interrupts the diddler, apparently in very high dudgeon, and slamming the door after him as he makes his escape. "But me no buts, sir, and none of your tricks upon travellers." Here again is a very clever diddle, of which the simplicity is not the least recommendation. A purse or pocketbook being really lost, the loser inserts in one of the daily papers of a large city a fully descriptive advertisement. Whereupon our diddler copies the facts of this advertisement, with a change of heading and general phraseology and address. The original, for instance, is long and verbose, is headed, "A pocketbook lost," and requires the treasure when found to be left at number 1 Tom Street. The copy is brief, and being headed with "lost," only indicates number 2 Dick or number 3 Harry Street, as the locality at which the owner may be seen. Moreover, it is inserted in at least 5 or 6 of the daily papers of the day, while in point of time it makes its appearance only a few hours after the original. Should it be read by the loser of the purse, he would hardly suspect it to have any reference to his own misfortune, but of course the chances are 5 or 6 to 1 that the finder will repair to the address given by the diddler rather than that pointed out by the rightful proprietor. The former pays the reward, pockets the treasure, and decamps. Quite an analogous diddle is this. A lady of ton has dropped somewhere in the street a diamond ring of very unusual value. For its recovery, she offers some $40 or $50 reward, giving in her advertisement a very minute description of the gem and of its settings, and declaring that, on its restoration at number so-and-so, in such and such avenue, the reward will be paid instanter, without a single question being asked. During the lady's absence from home, a day or 2 afterwards, a ring is heard at the door. "Number so-and-so in such and such avenue." A servant appears. The lady of the house is asked for and is declared to be out, at which astounding information the visitor expresses the most poignant regret. His business is of importance and concerns the lady himself. In fact, he had the good fortune to find her diamond ring. but perhaps it would be as well that he should call again. By no means, says the servant, by no means, says the lady's sister and the lady's sister-in-law, who are summoned forthwith. The ring is clamorously identified, the reward is paid, and the finder nearly thrust out of doors. The lady returns and expresses some little dissatisfaction with her sister and sister-in-law because they happen to have paid $40 or $50 for a facsimile of her diamond ring, a facsimile made out of a real pinchbeck and unquestionable paste. But as there is really no end to diddling, so there would be none to this essay, were I even to hint at half the variations or inflections of which this science is susceptible. I must bring this paper perforce to a conclusion, and this I cannot do better than by a summary notice of a very decent, but rather elaborate diddle, of which our own city was made the theater not very long ago, and which was unsubsequently repeated with success in other and still more verdant localities of the Union. A middle-aged gentleman arrives in town from parts unknown. He is remarkably precise, cautious, staid, and deliberate in his demeanor. His dress is scrupulously neat, but plain, unostentatious. He wears a white cravat, an ample waistcoat, made with an eye to conform alone, thick-soled, cozy-looking shoes, and pantaloons without straps. He has the whole air, in fact, of your well-to-do, sober-sided, exact, and respectable man of business, par excellence. One of the stern and outwardly hard, internally soft sort of people that we see in the crack-high comedies. Fellows whose words are so many bonds, and who are noted for giving away guineas in charity with the one hand, while, in the way of mere bargain, they exact the uttermost fraction of a farthing with the other. He makes much ado before he can get suited with a boarding house. He dislikes children. He has been accustomed to quiet. His habits are methodical. And then he would prefer getting into a private, more respectable, small family, piously inclined. Terms, however, are no object. Only he must insist upon settling this bill on the very first of every month. It is now the second, and begs his landlady, when he finally obtains one to his mind, not on any account, to forget his instructions upon this point, but to send in a bill and receipt precisely at 10 o'clock on the first day of every month, and under no circumstances to put it off to the second. These arrangements made, our man of business rents an office in a reputable rather than a fashionable quarter of the town. There is nothing he despises more than pretense. When there is much show, he says, there is seldom anything very solid behind, an observation which so profoundly impresses his landlady's fancy that she makes a pencil memorandum of it forthwith in her great family Bible, on the broad margin of the proverb of Solomon. The next step is to advertise after some fashion as this, in the principal business 6 pennies of the city. The pennies are eschewed as not respectable, and as demanding payment for all advertisements in advance. Our man of business holds it as a point of his faith that work should never be paid for until done. Wanted. The advertisers, being about to commence extensive business operations in this city, will require the services of 3 or 4 intelligent and competent clerks to whom a liberal salary shall be paid. The very best recommendations, not so much for capacity as for integrity, will be expected. Indeed, as the duties to be performed involve high responsibilities, and large amounts of money must necessarily pass through the hands of those engaged, it is deemed advisable to demand a deposit of $50 from each clerk employed. No person need apply, therefore, who is not prepared to leave this sum in the possession of the advertisers, and who cannot furnish in the most satisfactorily testimonials of mortality or of morality. Young gentlemen piously inclined will be preferred. Application should be made between the hours of 10 and 11 a.m. and 4 and 5 p.m. of messengers, Hogs, Hogs, Logs, Frogs, and Co. Number 110. Dog Street. Hi, Sir Doggo. Give me one moment. Sir Doggo. No, that's enough. You're fine. Oh, you're a good boy. Fourth grade. The fact that he did it as I read Dog Street is kind of funny. By the 31st day of the month, this advertisement has been brought to the offices of messengers Boggs, Hogs, Logs, Frogs, and Company, some 15 or 20 young gentlemen piously inclined. But our man of business is in no hurry to conclude a contract with any. No man of business is ever precipitate, and it is not until the most rigid catechism in respect to the piety of each young gentleman's inclination that his services are engaged and his $50 receipted for, just by way of proper precaution. On the part of the respectable firm of Boggs, Hogs, Logs, Frogs, and Company. On the morning of the first day of the next month, the landlady does not present her bill according to promise, a piece of neglect for which the comfortable head of the house, ending in Oggs, would no doubt have chided her severely, could he have been prevailed upon to remain in town a day or two for that purpose. As it is, the constables have had a sad time of it, running hither and thither, and all they can do is declare the man of business most emphatically a hen knee high, by which some persons imagine them to imply that he is NEI, by which again the very classical phrase non est inventus is supposed to be understood. In the meantime, the young gentlemen, one and all, are somewhat less piously inclined than before, while the landlady purchases a shilling's worth of the Indian rubber and very carefully obliterates the pencil memorandum that some fool has made in her great family Bible on the broad margin of the Proverbs of Solomon. Well, that was an interesting one. Put don't ask random questions. I think I have something about staying on track. But, wow, that sure was... Thought my service was going to be named the Science Lab. I do my best. It wasn't meant to be anything super serious, though I am trying to make it... I'm in the process of reorganizing it. All right. There is a very short story, and then we will call it a day because the next story is much longer and not one that I will be able to get through in a reasonable amount of time. It was a lot of diddling. All right. Last story. Byron and Miss Chaworth. L'Angis? No, this is... Wait. Oh, no. Oh, no. It's Latin. Les Anges, says Madame Dudevant, a woman who intersperses many an admirable sentiment amid a chaos of the most shameless and altogether objectionable fiction. Les Anges ne sont plus pures... Wait, maybe this is French. Que le coeur d'un jeune homme qui aime en vérité. No, maybe that was Latin. By the way, I suck at pronouncing both. But the angels are not purer than the heart of a young man who loves with fervor. That was the translation. They gave it to me. The hyperbole is scarcely less than true. It would be truth itself were it averred of the love of him who is at the same time young and a poet. The boyish poet love is indisputably that one of the human sentiments which most nearly realizes our dreams of the chaste and voluptuousness of heaven. In every allusion made by the author of Childe Harold to his passion for Mary Chaworth, there runs a vein of almost spiritual tenderness and purity, strongly in contrast with the gross earthliness pervading and disfiguring his ordinary love poems. The dream in which the incidents of his parting with her, when about to travel, are said to be delineated, or at least paralleled, has never been excelled, certainly never been excelled by him, in the blended fervor, delicacy, truthfulness, and ethereality which sublimate and adorn it. For this reason, it may be well doubted if he has written anything so universally popular. That his attachment for this Mary, in whose very name there indeed seemed to exist for him an enchantment, was earnest and long-abiding, we have every reason to believe. There are 100 evidences of this fact scattered not only through his own poems and letters, but in the memoirs of his relatives and contemporaries in general. But it was thus earnest and endearing. But that it was thus earnest and enduring does not controvert in any degree the opinion that it was a passion, if passion can properly be termed, of the most thoroughly romantic, shadowy, and imaginative character. It was born of the hour and of the youthful necessity to love, while it was nurtured by the waters and hills and the flowers and the stars. It had no particular regard to the person or to the character or to the reciprocating affection of Mary Chaworth. Any maiden not immediately and positively propulsive he would have loved under the same circumstances of hourly and unrestricted communion, such as our engraving shadows forth. They met without restraint and without reserve. As mere children they sported together. In boyhood and girlhood they read from the same books, sang the same songs, or roamed hand in hand through the grounds of the conjoined estates. The result was not merely natural or merely probable. It was as inevitable as destiny itself. In a view of a passion thus engendered, Miss Chaworth, who is represented as possessed of no little personal beauty and some accomplishments, could not have failed to serve sufficiently well as the incarnation of the ideal that haunted the fancy of the poet. It is perhaps better, nevertheless, for the mere romance of the love passages between the two, that their intercourse was broken up early in life and never uninterruptedly resumed in after years. Whatever of warmth, whatever of soul passion, whatever of the truer nair and essentiality of romance was elicited during the youthful association is to be attributed altogether to the poet. If she felt at all, it was only while the magnetism of his actual presence compelled her to feel. If she responded at all, it was merely because of the necromancy of his words of fire could not otherwise than exhort a response. In absence, the bard bore easily with him all the fancies which were the basis of his flame, a flame which absence itself but served to keep in vigor, while the less ideal, but at the same time the less really substantial affection of his lady-love perished utterly and forthwith through simple lack of the element which had fanned it into being. He, to her, in brief, was a not unhandsome and not ignoble, but somewhat portionless, somewhat eccentric and rather lame young man. She to him was the Egeria of his dreams, the Venus Aphrodite that sprang in full and supernal loveliness from the bright foam upon the storm-tormented oceans of his thoughts. Ouch. Ouch. That's unfortunate. Yeah, no E-word today, though we did get a lot of diddling. That was weird. I know times change, the words take on new meanings, but that was sure a whole lot of that word. All right, that is all from me. I am struggling with my voice and my eyes. Learned a little bit about how to cook over high heat and where to position the pan so that the fan actually keeps the smoke from escaping into my house. But tomorrow is anime night from work. Wednesday will be a work stream so I can get some shorts made. Thursday might be a hand cam because I'm really behind on it. Friday is Breath of the Wild. Saturday is Elden Ring. And Sunday is a karaoke. Thank you so much for 800 subscribers. And with that, I will wish you a good night. And I am going to go... I don't know what I'm going to go do. Not a whole lot, that's for sure. So, I will see you all later. I hope you have a wonderful night. Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye.